Howdy, it's Kyle talking about working from home. Because of the pandemic, many folks were forced to work from home whether they wanted to or not, and now many folks have the option to work from home if they want to. So in this video, I'm going to talk about some places that you might want to consider to relocate to as a good spot to work from home. This video isn't meant to be a countdown or the best places to work from home, but just a list of some off-the-radar places that you might not have thought about as a good place to work remotely. There are two different types of working from home. The first would be a job where you can literally be anywhere. So I can do this anywhere as long as there's an internet connection. The other type is like my wife, where she can work from home 2 or 3 days a week and go into the office 2 or 3 days a week. So she has to still be in the same town, but she still can work from home a couple days a week. And now for the list of cities, and some of these are going to be pretty surprising because some of these are places that you often don't hear many positive things being said about, but I do think working from home changes the rules as to what makes a good or bad place to live. So let's take a look at some off-the-radar places that you might want to consider as good places to work from home. I want to first mention Buffalo, New York, and this isn't a place that you hear about people moving to, it's a place that people are moving from. The city is losing population. Erie County in which it's located is losing population. The metro area is losing population, so the whole area is going down in population. But it's also a pretty fun city. There are a lot of positive things going for it. The downtown is pretty nice. The waterfront area has been improved. The outer harbor area, the canal side, so a lot of good spots for outdoor type stuff right downtown. The Tips Nature Preserve is, piece of woods right near the city. You have the Elmwood Village, which is the cool, funky part of town with the cool shops and boutiques and the restaurants and bars. So a lot of positive things going on in Buffalo. But the biggest negative for the city is that there just really isn't a great job market there. So a place with a bad job market and a declining population means houses there are going to be pretty cheap. I pulled up a handful of properties here, and none of these are in the real rough parts of Buffalo. There are some pretty gnarly parts of the city, but these are all quiet, normal type neighborhoods. And $200 for a small house here, $170 for another kind of small house, but it's doesn't need a whole bunch of work. $90 for a house that does need some work, but it's not in a bad neighborhood. I mean, you can put you can put $50,000 into this thing. It's going to be a real nice place. Newer construction, nice house, quiet neighborhood. These are really good prices. Bigger house. You can do pretty well in Buffalo in terms of housing prices. The wages there are above average, but of course, if you're working from home, you're taking the wages of wherever you're working from. But things are relatively cheap in Buffalo. Houses are cheap, but it's a pretty fun city. So that's why it's on this list. Next, I want to mention Dayton, Ohio. And if you watch some of my videos, you might be like, didn't this guy just say Dayton was one of the worst cities in America in a recent video? And yeah, I did. The reason why I mentioned Dayton as being one of the worst cities in America is because the metro area has over 1 million people, but the amenities offered by the cities doesn't really feel like you're in a big city like that. It feels like a much smaller city because smaller towns will offer the same restaurant, bar, nightlife, kind of entertainment scene, same kind of shopping and stuff. So it feels like a smaller city. And one of the things that hurts Dayton in that regard is the fact that Cincinnati is only 45 minutes to the southwest and Columbus is only an hour to the east-northeast. So it's sandwiched between two much more fun, kind of vibrant cities. However, from a working from home standpoint, it's okay because if you're not commuting every day, it's not a big deal. You can go to Cincinnati or Columbus every weekend because you're not commuting every day. So going there to do the fun shopping kind of nightlife stuff or just to do things you can do in those cities that you can't do in Dayton is something that you can do more often because you're not commuting every day. A lot of Dayton is pretty rough, and there's a lot of abandoned homes and empty parts of the city. So you can get stuff like this for dirt cheap. It needs a lot of work, but in some of the rougher parts of town, but you can be somewhere like this where it's an okay place, doesn't need a ton of work, and it's not in a bad part of town, and it's still under 100,000. This place, decent sized place, decent neighborhood. 105. Houses are really cheap in Dayton, so this is a place again like Buffalo where the population is going down and there isn't a good job market. So the houses there are pretty cheap. This one's pretty cool. Look at this. It's $150. It's on a quiet street. It's already been renovated for one. This is crazy. You're not going to get a place like this for $150 in most parts of the country. $180 for this. Nice newer construction. Of course, property taxes in Ohio are pretty high, but when you can get houses like, look at this. Anywhere else in the U.S., this is $1 million home. So if you want to live in $1 million home for literally half as much, check out Dayton. The next one that I want to talk about is Dover, Delaware. This is another place that usually gets a pretty bad rap. You don't often hear too many good things about Dover. One of the reasons for this is that even though Delaware is usually considered a northern state, it was segregated. So the parts of town that were the segregated black parts of town are still pretty poor today. And even though poverty is pretty high in the city, I think overall it gets a worse rap than it deserves. It's a little town, it's the state capital, has a really nice historic district. The area around the Capitol building is really beautiful, and some really cool old houses in the town as well. I was just up in Dover and Delaware in general a few weeks ago, and I would hear people talk about how Dover is just not a very safe city. It's got high crime. So I looked at some of the stats, and it really isn't that dangerous. I mean, there were 4 murders back in 2019. I mean, 4 murders for a town of 50,000 is pretty high, but it's not exactly out of control. So if you live in Dover, you can get to the beach in an hour, Philly in an hour and a half, DC, Baltimore in under 2 hours. So you're really close to a lot of great stuff, but it's pretty cheap in Dover, unlike those other places. And your money will go pretty far in Dover, so you can get some nice houses that don't need a lot of work on quiet streets and nice parts of town for good prices. I mean, this house would be well over $500,000 in most other parts of the country, especially in the Northeast. Just your money goes pretty far. Property taxes are pretty low. Places that need some work like this are going to be pretty cheap. This place needs a little bit of work. Actually, doesn't really need that much work. I mean, it's good prices. Nice neighborhoods, quiet streets. This one here is not a nice neighborhood, not a quiet street, but you can just kind of see how cheap you can go if you want to fix her up. Or you probably wouldn't want this one on the main street through town. But anyway, you can go pretty far with your money in Dover. The next one that I want to mention is Charleston, West Virginia. And this is another place that's losing population and has a really bad job market. I've been visiting Charleston at least once or twice a year for the past 20 years. And it's been struggling with poverty and drugs that entire time. There are some really rough stretches in Charleston, and also a couple of the suburbs are even poorer. But there are some positive things going on in the city. The downtown is okay. The main street going through there has some good shopping, entertainment kind of stuff, some decent restaurants and bars. But just like everywhere else on this list, declining population, poor job market means cheap houses. You can go real cheap in West Virginia, and Charleston's probably one of the most expensive parts of the state, and you can still get decent houses for pretty cheap. Now, Dunbar here is a suburb. It's not the nicest place in the world, but you can go real cheap there. Decent house, old construction that needs some work for super cheap. I mean, you could get a house for under 100, put 100,000 into it. It's going to be a really nice place. So you can go really, really cheap. And look at this place. I mean, this is a huge house in a nice part of town for $380. I mean, if you want to go big, you're not going to do much better than a place like this for this kind of price. Now, Charleston isn't the kind of place you move to look for a job, but if you are working from home and you have a job, it's a place you might want to consider. On a recent video, somebody made a comment, can this guy do any video without talking about California? And the answer is no. I did want to bring up one specific part of California, and this is geared mainly towards people in the Bay Area. And so I'm talking about Lake County, mainly the towns of Lakeport and Kelseyville. Lake County is just north of wine country, a couple of hours north of San Francisco. The main lake there is called Clear Lake. It's a natural lake. It's got rolling hills and nice scenery in the area. Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument's right there. So I'll show you some houses here to give you an idea of how affordable this place is. So again, this is not going to be super affordable prices for people in other parts of the country, but if you're a Bay Area tech worker, these are pretty cheap houses. So I'm going to scroll through some of these. And these are, you're not getting houses like this for this price in most parts of California, especially not near wine country. Look at this one, $450, huge lot. Kind of a weird property, but I mean, it's a big house. This one needs a ton of work, $223. I mean, this one needs a ton of work too. A lot of these houses are going to need a ton of work. This one doesn't, but the reason why you're seeing a lot of houses cheap in this area and ones that need a lot of work but are cheap is because of this map. Unfortunately, I have to show this map on many videos because it's just so relevant right now. And of course, I just mentioned Charleston, and that's like the heart of the opioid crisis, but do look at Lake County just north of the Bay Area. This is another one of those areas that's been besieged by drugs, and a lot of these old houses that need a ton of work. I hate to be so blunt, but it's almost like 10 to 15 years of tweaker neglect in some of these houses. So I'll go back to a couple of the ones that I showed. I mean, 223, this house probably needs at least $100,000 worth of work, but $330 for a house in this area is still pretty cheap. This one's $285. I mean, you put $100 into this one, a $400,000 house, that'll be easily what this is worth. Now, I don't want to insinuate that the houses I'm showing here are owned by tweakers, but I'm just saying the town in general has been besieged by the drug crisis, and a lot of distressed properties you can get for pretty cheap in a very desirable part of the state. So if you're a tech worker in the Bay Area and you only have to go to the office, say, once a week, a 2-hour drive might not be that bad to get into a place where you can own a big house on a nice property near a lake. And I don't see this town being run down like this for too long. I think eventually it's going to be kind of realized that you can get a nice house on the lake and turn this place into a much nicer place than it is now. The next city that I want to mention is Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has been one of my favorite big cities in the country for a while now, and it has a lot of positive things to offer. If you like walking, this is one of the best cities in the country for it. It's actually kind of a small city in terms of area, and along with the topography, it makes neighborhoods much more distinct, even though they might be really close to each other. And there are several cool neighborhoods in the town that are fun to hang out in, have a lot of good local shops and boutiques, restaurants and bars, depending on your taste. Right downtown, you have the Strip District, which has a lot of activity, a lot of restaurants and bars, international markets. If you're going to be a tourist in the city, you'll probably be hanging out here. The South Side Flats on the south side is where you have a lot more local type restaurants and nightlife stuff. Lawrenceville is your cool hipster area. It's also the prime neighborhood in the city. Oakland is the part of town near the campus of the University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon University, so it has a little more younger college town feel. Squirrel Hill is a nice tucked away neighborhood. It's just real quiet. Feels almost like a kind of a smaller town right in the middle of the city, but cool local shops and stuff there. But the population of the city, the county, and the metro area are all going down. So that's where Pittsburgh is right now. It's losing population, but because of that, you can get a house for pretty cheap. And it's usually considered one of the most, if not the most affordable big city in the country. So I'll do the rundown of houses in Pittsburgh you can get. I mean, cheap houses that don't need a lot of work, really low property taxes in the area, nice historic homes, decent size, good neighborhoods. All the ones I'm showing here are in decent neighborhoods on quiet streets. Look at this one. This is kind of a nice little place right here. 100,000, needs some work. Actually, not that much work, really. The places in the rough parts of town are really cheap. You can go 50, 60,000 in some of those parts of town. But you can go a little bit cheaper here, a little bit rougher neighborhood. But these are really cheap houses for what you're getting, especially in today's America in big cities. This is a really cool, weird looking house. Cheap for what it is. But yeah, Pittsburgh is a place that I really like. I think it's a really nice big city. But again, because of the job give and take with manufacturing and high tech, it's losing population, but it is a great place to move to. Cheap houses, low property taxes, really fun city. Now brace yourself for this next one. Give me a chance to explain myself before you X out of the video. And it's Gary, Indiana. Yes, that Gary, Indiana. The one that's often referred to as Scary Gary. Let me tell you some stats about Gary. The population is about 75,000. It's decreasing a lot. There's a lot of empty homes there, a lot of abandoned buildings, and it has ridiculously high crime. In 2019, there were 57 murders there in a town of 75,000. That is crazy. For perspective, San Diego has 1.4 million people and had 50 murders in 2019. So all the things you've heard about Gary are true. It's incredibly dangerous, really high violent crime, really serious drug problem. But not all of Gary is bad, and there are some decent parts of town. So if you think kind of like a tic-tac-toe 9-square grid, the southwestern corner and the northeastern corner of Gary are actually okay. And there are even some gasp rich people in Gary. So let me show you a map of the city to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. When most people think of Gary, they're thinking about what is the western 2/3 of the city. So you look at where the grid pattern streets are. Where it says Gary is right in the downtown, and everything kind of south and west of that is the part of town that's known to be pretty rough. However, look at the northeastern portion of the city, the area that's surrounded by green space. That's also part of Gary. So when I mention Gary in this video, I'm talking about basically that part of town only. And the reason why it's on this list is because of what you can see from this map. To the north is Lake Michigan. There won't be any development there. To the east is Indiana Dunes National Park. Won't be any development there. To the west is protected park and wetland kind of area. No development there. So there's always going to be this kind of protected area there where there won't be any kind of development nearby. Look at what else is on the Lake Michigan shoreline. Now this is U.S. Steel here. This has been losing jobs for a long time. Going back to the 70s, they've been cutting jobs for the past 50 years. If this were to ever go away completely, you can imagine what would happen to the lakeshore here. It wouldn't be low-income housing and Walmarts, that's for sure. And Gary has tried gentrifying for years, and there isn't much local pushback from it. It's almost like, yeah, please do gentrify this place, we need it. But the problem is that it's just not quite close enough to Chicago. Downtown Gary is about 30 miles southeast of downtown Chicago, so 30 miles in a big city is going to take you at least 45 minutes, maybe an hour to commute one way. However, if you only need to go into the office once or twice a week, that 1 hour commute one way doesn't look so bad. And this is a bold prediction, but I'm still going with it. I think by 2030, Gary is going to be hipster haven. Hipsters have already been kind of sniffing around Gary. There's some stuff going up in that northeastern part of the city. But because when most people hear Gary, they're still thinking scary Gary, you can get some pretty decent houses there. So all the ones I'm going to show here are in that northeastern part of the city where it's just middle class and not bad at all. I want to point this one out because the backyard literally goes right up against Indiana Dunes National Park. That's pretty cool. But you can get some decent houses in Gary for good prices, especially considering Chicago salaries. So this is about the worst one I could find in this part of town. Obviously a major fixer-upper, but 120, I mean, you put 100 into this one, 220 is going to be a pretty cheap place real close to the lake. Here's a decent-sized post-World War II house, probably needs some work, 170, cheap price. Older home, pretty cool construction, dirt cheap. So if you're in the Chicago metro area and you don't really want to leave Chicago, I know people love Chicago but often feel priced out because the property taxes there are just ridiculous. You can live really close to Chicago. You can still do the things you like to do, live only an hour away. And because you're not commuting every day, you can do that hour drive on the weekend, every weekend kind of things. You can still do your fun Chicago kind of stuff without having to pay the really high property taxes and have a large house near a national park, near the lake, in an area that's almost certainly going to be gentrified a lot more in the coming years. So those are some of the off-the-radar places I wanted to mention as places that might be considered good spots to work from home. If you were to do a search for work-from-home cities, the media darling in this is right here, Chattanooga, Tennessee. But the reason why I wouldn't put it in the same category as the other cities on this list is because of what I'm going to show you now. Houses here are not cheap. It's gotten really expensive here. So this is a brand new house. It's really nice. I like the way it looks. Real small lot though. Decent neighborhood. 800. What, are you kidding me? Look at this place. Real nice place. Big house. Decent neighborhood. Close to 600. So Chattanooga is just not cheap. This one's near the airport. Not the best neighborhood. I mean, it's an okay neighborhood, but it's near the airport. This, I mean, it's just not cheap to live here. So if these prices are okay with you, yeah, move to Chattanooga. Come on down. But I'm not going to mention it as a great place to work from home because it really isn't that cheap to live here. It used to be cheap. These kind of houses, think how much these houses cost in some of the other cities I've shown in this video. A lot of these aren't in the best neighborhoods. So yeah, these houses would be much cheaper in other cities. So look at this one. This is a massive fixer-upper. It's in literally the worst part of town on one of the busiest streets in that part of town, and it's still 120. This is the kind of place that would have been $50,000 in Dayton or Pittsburgh or Buffalo. So Chattanooga is a great place. It's the media darling for the place to move to for work from home, but it isn't that cheap. So that's my list of some off-the-radar places that I think would be good spots to consider to relocate to work from home. And working from home is a little bit different than normal type working. So the rules are a little bit different, and the places that might be considered good spots to live are a little bit different based on the type of commuting and work you're doing. So, some of these spots are kind of strange, but I do think that working from home can change the dynamics and can change the fortunes of some of these cities as well. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up to let me know you approve, and subscribe to this channel if you're interested in learning more about U.S. geography. I'm talking about cities and counties and states. I'm comparing them and ranking them in all kinds of different categories, talking about cross-country road tripping, and everything I do comes from a little more nerdy type perspective. But yeah, thanks for watching. Geography King, signing out.